Good morning and welcome to Calvary. I'm glad you're able to join us from your living rooms, online, wherever you may find yourself this morning. As we deal with the COVID-19 and everything that's happening with that, our goal is still to bring community to the church and to the greater people of Regina. So we're thankful that you're able to come and join us. We're thankful that you are able to listen in and follow along. And so we just want to say thank you during this time for checking us out, seeing what's happening, and hearing God's word. Now, if you'll all rise as we start to sing, I'm kidding, that'd be awkward, you're in your living room. But I hope you enjoy the service.
When my hope and strength is gone, you're the one who calls me on. You are the life, you are the light that's in my soul. Oh, your resurrection power burns like fire in my heart. When waters rise, I lift my eyes up to your throne. We are more than conquerors through Christ. You have overcome this world, this life. We will not bow to sin or to shame. We are defiant in your name. You are the fire that cannot be tamed. You are the power in our days. Our God, our conqueror. I will sing into the night. Christ is risen and on high. Greater is he living in me than in the world. No surrender, no retreat. We are free and we're redeemed. We will declare over despair our hope. We are more than conquerors through Christ. You have overcome this world, this life. We will not bow to sin or to shame. We are defiant in your name. You are the fire that cannot be tamed. You are the power in our veins, Lord. Our God, our conqueror. Nothing is impossible. Every chain is breakable with you. We are victorious. You are stronger than our hearts. You are greater than the dark with you. We are victorious. Nothing is impossible. Every chain is breakable with you. We are victorious. You are stronger than our hearts. You are greater than the dark with you. We are victorious. Nothing is impossible. Every chain is breakable with you. We are victorious. You are stronger than our hearts. You are greater than the dark with you. We are victorious. We are more than conquerors through Christ. You have or to shame. We are defiant in your name. You are the fire that cannot be tamed. You are the power in our veins, our Lord, our God, our conqueror. We are more than conquerors through Christ. You have overcome this world, this life. We will not bow to sin or to shame. We are defiant in your name. You are the fire that cannot be tamed.
Hi there. Sorry, we were just having some non-scripted banter just before you happened to turn on right now. But welcome to a new segment, and we're calling that because we're definitely like a TV station now. A new segment where we invite missionaries and local missionaries to come have a conversation and just share a bit about what they do. And in our debut for this segment, we are very lucky because we get one of Calvary's own missionaries that they support, Kaylee Selke, who is here with Northern Canada Evangelical Mission.
You got it.
I got
Good job.
I know, right?
I'm
And
impressed.
so, and that's why I'm wearing this lovely swag. We have got, these lovely mugs here. We are stopping at no expense to promo this. And so, Kaylee, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really honored to be here. I appreciate the love and support of this church so much and for taking me on as one of their missionaries. So I'm really excited to share a little bit more about what I do with you guys.
So tell me a bit about Kaylee Selke and how you got into the role, whatever that is, that you are in now. And so you grew up, you're from Saskatchewan?
Yeah.
You're from Regina?
Yes.
Now what? Tell us more.
That's it. That's all you need to know.
All right.
That's it. No.
Take it over. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. No, I am from Regina. I've been here my whole life. I grew up as a missionary kid and pastor's kid. My parents started a church in the inner city of Regina, Healing Hearts Ministries. And so I have grown up in that church, in that ministry, reaching out to the people in that community. And I loved it. I can honestly say I loved growing up in a ministry home and being a part of the church. I helped out at the youngest age possible. Any job I could do, I was on it. Serving coffee, cleaning up coffee mugs. Like I was there. I wanted to serve. And so I've always just had that desire to serve and to be a part of ministry. And so, yeah, growing up, went through school, and right after high school, I went to Nipawin Bible College for 4 years, just knowing that my track was, I want to be a ministry. I want to be a ministry. And so after Bible school, I had a little more exposure to ministry, joining a drama team and traveling. And then life was put on hold for a little bit, for a couple years, and I was sick with cancer. And so that kind of messed up things a little bit. I was like, okay, my track's going this way. Like now what's happening? But yeah, thanks to God, I'm okay. I'm healthy. And kind of right after that journey, an opportunity opened up with NCEM. My dad became general director. And through him and him just sharing some of the needs that the mission had, and one of them being a social media presence, there was nobody posting and letting people know what is happening on there. And so I saw that as a really neat opportunity. And yeah, that's kind of how I got in there.
So you are the social media coordinator for NCEM.
Yes.
And that's one part of your job. The other part of your job is with Healing Hearts Ministry right here in Regina?
Yes. Yeah, so since I do still live here in Regina, I couldn't see myself not being a part of Healing Hearts. I was already the youth director before I joined NCEM, and so I had already started the youth ministry there, like keeping that going. I had a heart for that, and so when I joined the mission, one of the things that I told them was like, is it okay that I'm still doing some ministry at Healing Hearts too? Like, is that okay, as well as helping you with your social media, PR stuff, all those things. And so they were completely on board. So I'm kind of 50-50. That's why you kind of see a little bit of both here. I'm kind of half Healing Hearts, half NCEM, but I love them both.
That's great. So now why don't you tell us a bit about NCEM itself? And so it seems it's Canada-wide. Who are they reaching? How many missionaries you got? What are some of the ministries that are involved in NCEM?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, NCEM, if you didn't catch earlier, is Northern Canada Evangelical Mission. And like in the title, Canada, we are across Canada.
mostly in the northern parts, but definitely other places too. But our main heart and focus is to reach First Nations communities, Native communities, Inuit communities, all across Canada, and especially in some of the remote places that there hasn't been a lot of missionaries there or the gospel shared. That is our heart. We want to share with those people. So we have around 100 missionaries all across Canada, and some of the big ministries that run out of NCEM, we have a bunch of camps. There's some station camps. Northern Saskatchewan, we have one in New Brunswick. We run some day camps out of Quebec, some wilderness camps in the mountains with the youth. So that's a huge one, and I personally love going and visiting them. We also have a TV program station, Tribal Trails. I don't know if anyone's heard of Tribal Trails.
Great story about this, actually. My wife was working at her senior's home, and she turned on the TV for them. And actually, I was on TV on some station with something that I had recorded earlier, and they were kind of like, meh. and then when immediately afterwards, Tribal Trails came on, and the moment Tribal Trails came on, all of a sudden they were like, what? Your husband's famous. He's on the same network as Tribal Trails. So I was famous.
True, you are famous.
Kind of vicariously through what NCEM's mission is. So thank you for that. So Tribal Trails is part of that. You've got missionaries at communities all around the north, and you've got to find a way to get them there and get people and supplies to and from there. And so what else you got?
We have a aviation department, so we actually have our own planes and our own pilots. And so to some of the areas that you cannot drive, or definitely 75 years ago when we started, some of these places did not have roads to get to. And so, so then we had planes that we are able to bring supplies, fly missionaries there, fly people to support the missionaries there and things like that. So I enjoy the planes because I got to ride in one of them once, and that was super cool. But
nice. And what's your what's like the most remote area that you've got missionaries in right now?
Yeah, so I would say Pavaniatuk, Quebec. Do you know where that is?
I do not. Gesundheit.
Wow. If you don't know where that is, you should Google that right now. It is way off in the north.
Wait, put down your phones. You're not allowed to Google it now. You're supposed to be watching church, all right?
Sorry,
so,
bad influence.
Once
the social
church is
media
over,
coordinator.
pick up your phone and Google. Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
So basically, you cannot get there. You can't drive there. You can't even get on WestJet or Air Canada. You have to have a private plane, and you are flying. We're talking about flying. You are flying for like hours across tundra, and you're just like, is there even life up here? And then all of a sudden, there's a tiny community in the distance, and just like, whoa. And so we do have a single missionary there, and she speaks the language, and she's able to share Christ in the schools, teach Bible classes, and it's really cool. But that is the most remote place.
Nice. And you are raising your own support. Calvary helps a bit with that, and but you're raising your support. And where are you with that? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so missionaries with NCEM, we are required to raise full support. And so as a single missionary, we are supposed to raise $4,100 a month. And right now I'm at 40% of that. So I definitely have a bit to go.
All right. And so, with that being said, and knowing that there's room where you still need support, if you're watching this and you are interested in supporting Kaylee as she's embarking on this mission for where God has called her, and you can hear just her story of where God has led her up until this point, and it's so great to hear. If you're interested in this, you can contact the church and we can get you in touch with Kaylee. I know she'd love to hear from you. And you can also find her on Facebook, NCEM, on Instagram, where you can see pictures of everything that's going on in the life of Northern Canada Evangelical Mission. But thank you for joining us this morning and making this the debut. We're here with NCEM royalty, second in line to the NCEM throne. And wow, what a way to kick it off. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. Next week, we are going to hear from more local missionaries as we talk with Valerie and Sheldon Dean from their Family Life Ministries. And so we'll be having them next week as well.
Good morning. It's great to be here with all of you this morning. My name's Keegan. I'm going to have the opportunity of sharing the Word of God with both your kids and you as well. So for the next little bit, or however long we're able to meet together like this, I felt it would be important to just focus on one person in the Bible and just kind of walk through their story together as a group. And as I was brainstorming and thinking about who I wanted to share about during this time, a name kept popping out to me, somebody that I've always loved to learn from and reflect on his life, and that person being who many of us know as King David in the Bible. And so throughout the next few weeks, I wanted to just share about his life and his story and what we can learn from what he experienced and what he went through in his life. So starting out, in order to understand David and what he went through, we have to touch just a little bit on what kind of things were going on in his time. At the time, David, he was a young shepherd boy, and they had a king in Israel. It was their first king because the way they structured their lives, they were supposed to live under God. But the people wanted a king just like all the other nations, and so they eventually had a man named Saul step up as king, anointed by a man named Samuel. Now Saul, he was really impressive. He looked very kingly. He was tall, he was strong, probably very masculine. He was the image of a king, and the people really appreciated that. They really wanted that. But as Saul lived his life, as he ruled as their king, he began to take shortcuts. He began to make mistakes. He began to do things that were very selfish and not in line with what God wanted for his people. And so as time went on, eventually Samuel, who was a close friend with Saul, had to tell him the word of God to him and that he was no longer going to be king and that God was looking for somebody else who would actually reflect God's heart, his own heart. And so Saul wasn't happy about this, but Samuel went off and he began looking for a new king. And that's where we find in the passage we're going to be in today. So we're going to be in 1 Samuel 16. Luckily, I don't have to wait for you guys to turn there because you guys can just put me on pause if you need some time to turn there. But in 1 Samuel 16, we find Samuel looking for a new king. And God tells him to go to a man named Jesse and to find one of his sons because one of them are going to be the new king. So Samuel shows up and he tells Jesse and his sons that he's going to eat with them and that they should get themselves ready, not fully telling them why he was there. So Jesse, he comes and he starts bringing out his sons. And Samuel sees the first son and says, man, he looks really impressive. He looks really strong. He's probably going to be the new king. But God says no. He says to him in verse 7, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so Jesse brings his sons one after another, and God says, no, not this one, not this one, until finally it seems like there's no sons left. Until Samuel asks, do you have any more children? Jesse says, yes, I have a young son named David, but he's out in the fields looking after the sheep. He doesn't matter. It's not important for him to come. But Samuel says, no, we should wait for him. And so they bring David back, and he walks in, and it says that he's described as being ruddy, a fine appearance, and handsome features. So it's not like he was very ugly. He was good looking, but he wasn't nearly as impressive as the other young men. And the Lord says about David, Rise and anoint him. He is the one. In this story, we find Samuel looking for a new king, and the last one had been very impressive. He looked kingly, but he ended up not being a very good king. So God says to Samuel and begins to look for someone who isn't just impressive on the outside, but reflects God on the inside, who is like himself. And in the same way, I want to encourage us all here today that even though we may look at people and judge on the outside appearance and what we look like and how we appear, God doesn't fully care on what's going on. He doesn't care about what people see. He cares what he can see going on inside of our hearts. And so I want to encourage each and every one of you that as you go out, as you make friends as kids, as you're at school, maybe not now, obviously, but as you interact, as you hang out, and as you build into each other, don't just look for the impressive people, the people who look cool, or the people who look impressive, but look for those people who may be better on the inside, who may have hearts that reflect who God is.
I am so glad that you are able to join us again from your living rooms, from your kitchens, from your computers, from your phones, wherever you may be, as we journey through this really whole new world of what church is like during COVID-19. And so I'm glad you're able to tune in. I'm glad you're able to join with us. And really part of this is just us being able to find out, what does community look like even from a distance? And how are we able to grow stronger in our community, even if it's from a distance? And part of that is gathering together, like we're doing now, even from different locations and different places. We're still able to gather together, read God's word together, sing and worship together, and hear what missionaries have been doing together. And so all of this is great. And again, uncharted territory for really the world where we live. And so I'm glad that you are able to join us this morning. My name is Luke. I am the lead pastor here at Calvary, and I'm going through a series that's looking at the locations of the Easter, during the Easter story, the locations of the Passion narrative. And last week we took a look at the Garden of Gethsemane, asking that question of what happened in that place, and what can we take from Jesus in some of his most human moments. We saw that there was struggle. We saw that there was solitude as he distanced himself, or his disciples distanced themselves from him, even in the garden, in the time where he needed them the most. And then we can also see that out of this, Jesus exerted a large amount of strength. And so we see that even in times of struggle, even in times of solitude, there is strength. And so we continue on that path this morning as we ask the question about the location of the courtyard, understanding the courtyard and the trials of Jesus. And again, all of this is leading up to the Easter story. And I think it's important for us to understand the context of the narrative, understand the context of the people who are involved in this. And as we come to the last part of Matthew chapter 26, we see that there are those who are intent on seeing Jesus dead. There are people who are wanting him gone. They are tired of hearing what he has said. And more importantly, they feel threatened by what he has said. Most of it is the religious leaders. And so we find ourselves in a place where Jesus is being put on trial. Out of this place where he had support and he had solitude, then struggle, and then submitting to his Father for what was about to happen next, we see strength, which he needs as he heads into darker times. It's important for us to keep in mind this morning that Jesus actually had 6 different trials. 3 of them were religious, with the religious leaders, and 3 of them were civil, as what we would know a trial to be like. And we'll take a look next week at the civil trials, and we'll take a look at the civil trials next week. And this week we're going to focus on the religious trials of Jesus. And so let's take a look at that. And really it starts off with an examination by Annas. And we read in John 18, 12 through 14, that Jesus was bound and led to Annas. And And by the way, the Passion movie, which many of you have probably seen, shows that Jesus is secured with chains as he's led away. And I think that's probably right when you understand how things were done back then. In the Gospels, we read about two different individuals who are given the title of high priest, Annas and Caiaphas. According to the Old Testament, the high priesthood was a life office, much like the Supreme Court in the U.S. It's a lifetime appointment until they are gone. But the Romans had given this role to Caiaphas, even though many still look to Annas. And so, even in this religious context, you could see the influence of the Romans slowly creeping in to religious life. Annas was the one who was the actual religious high priest, and Caiaphas was that who was appointed by the Romans. So already you can tell that even in the trials of Jesus, there's two very different perspectives based on the two people, but also both fall under that category of a religious trial. And so we understand that Annas ruled until 15 AD. Caiaphas was the son-in-law of Annas and was powerful and was considered extremely ruthless. We know this from Josephus and other historical books from that time, that Caiaphas was known for his heavy hand of the law, and really during this time we see some of the most or the highest number of crucifixions happening during this time. Now, there's at least 4 reasons why they took Jesus to Annas first. Because you're probably asking, well, why one and not the other? And here we can see that there's a few reasons. One, the leaders respected him and wanted his blessings on their actions. Remember, he was the one that was appointed by the religious leaders to that lifetime appointment. So they saw him as really the truly valid judge in all this, from their view. Caiaphas was one that was appointed by the Romans and therefore not. They were hoping Annas would find some incriminating evidence against Jesus. And here's the funny one, is that Annas actually just lived closer to the Garden of Gethsemane. If we understand the location of everything happening, Annas' house was the closest one, and so they figured, you know what, we'll stop along on the way and we'll find ourselves there. And during this preliminary trial, the Roman guards were dismissed so religious leaders could do what they wanted with Jesus. And this is tradition as well, which is the religious court is the religious court. The Romans were not welcome there, which is why the Romans had sought to influence it by appointing another judge. And so the Roman guards were dismissed, and this was strictly a religious trial. And here's what we have. In John 18, 19 through 24, we discover that Annas interrogated Jesus. And according to Jewish law, it was illegal for the accused to stand before just one judge and be directly questioned. When Jesus answered him, one of the officials smacked him in the face. And Jesus replied, "If I have said something wrong, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Jesus is then sent by Annas to Caiaphas for round 2. See, right from the beginning, Jesus responds using the law against them. And unfortunately, in this case, for Jesus, this made them that much more mad. So they attack Jesus. Jesus responds, again, out of kindness and out of just the law, and using the law that they studied and that they spent all their time in to come back to him. Caiaphas now holds court. And this is more of a committee. So, I mean, this is probably as close as you'll ever get to a Baptist tribunal, because it's held by committee. And so, because the entire court was not convened to charge Jesus, but just a few leaders who were woken up in the middle of the night, Matthew 26:57 says, those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had him assembled. And thirdly, we now see that the Sanhedrin sentences Jesus to death. This is a decision to put Jesus to death, and in Matthew 27:1 it says, early in the morning, all of the chief priests and the elders of the people came to the decision to put Jesus to death. Fourthly, we see that Jesus was presented to Pilate, and this is recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. Fifthly, Jesus has a hearing with Herod. And sixth, Jesus is returned back to Pilate and sentenced to death through Roman law. This is a very long process that's happening here, but it's important for us to understand the context. 3 religious trials, 3 non-religious trials or civil trials. And I want to take a look at how Jesus approaches each and every one of these. So if you've got your Bibles, you can follow along as I read Matthew 26, and we're going to be reading from verses 57 to 68. Matthew 26, verses 57 to 68. Those who arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up into the courtyard of the high priest. He entered, and he sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they may put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priestess said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." "Yes, it is as you say I am," Jesus replied. "But I say to you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spit in his face, struck him with their fists, slapped him, and said, prophesy to us, Christ. Who hit you?" as they mocked him. There's a lot there. And some of the most dramatic moments of the Passion story. In fact, in verse 57, we're introduced to Caiaphas, who's supposed to be the spiritual leader of Israel. He was the only one who could go into the Holy of Holies in the temple and offer the atonement for the sins of the people. In verse 59, it tells us the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. Now, right from the beginning here, you can see that this courtyard is a place of not only false witness, but it's a place of blasphemy. It's a place of hypocrisy. Everything that they were supposed to do for the law and with the law was not being done. They let little things creep in to allow their bias to come first. In fact, what we see is that many false witnesses came forward against Jesus. Why? Just for the sake of having him put to death. For the sake of seeing him suffer. Because they wanted their own future. They wanted their own ways going forward, the way it had always been for them. But Jesus was bringing something different, and they saw this as a problem. I hope you understand this as you sit here this morning, that, again, a lot of this story of Jesus is not a lot different than what we may face as we start to go through persecution when we start to share about who Jesus is to us. And I think one of the beautiful things about this story is that we can understand that throughout it all, Jesus has been there before us. Jesus suffered before us. And knowing that and knowing how to respond in these cases, we can also know how we should respond when we feel persecuted by others as well. As we start to share our own stories and start to share the story of Jesus in our lives, no doubt people will respond in an angry way. But there's also a way in which we can respond, which is both loving and joyful, and has this gentleness and kindness with it. Jesus responds. Yet as he responds, we're able to see that it's not one that's out of anger. And this has been his whole way, even from the garden when the soldiers came to take him away. You would expect his response to be one out of anger as he saw Judas come towards him and betray him. You'd expect anger in that, but instead his response was that of peace. You see this in the trial, that his response is one out of the law and saying, this is what I know is true. So now we find ourselves here taking a look at this group of people who had come against Jesus. The Sanhedrin were supposed to be men of character, educated in the law, able to understand both Greek and Hebrew and also Aramaic, and fancy enough, also supposed to be humble. But these leaders were unbelieving, it says in Luke chapter 22, interested in their own survival, it says in John chapter 11, and filled with envy, it says in Matthew chapter 27. We see something of their hearts in Matthew 26, verse 4, which says, and they plotted to arrest Jesus in some sly way and kill him. It's interesting that the plot to condemn Jesus and to kill him, they couldn't find any evidence, so they had to bring false witness. And even in all of this planning, they still found themselves not able to come up with the evidence. And I think this is what happens also when we let anger and we let fear creep into our lives. Right? Especially anger. When we're angry and we want something done, it's amazing what will happen to get something done. In this, we again see Jesus' response. Not one that's out of anger, but one that sees exactly what they're doing. And finally, when we see the two witnesses in verse 61 declared that this person said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days, the charge was significant enough for at least two reasons. First, it was a capital offense to destroy the temple, and so that was punishable by death immediately. And second, some Jews believed that when the Messiah came, he would demolish the old temple and build a new one. So these witnesses were coming against him with two things. One, a capital charge, but knowing that if this was a capital charge and he would destroy the temple, he'd be put to death. But secondly, if he admitted that he was the Messiah, it would mean that he would also tear down the temple and rebuild a new one. Right? And so no matter how Jesus answered this, they would say it was a capital offense and that he should be put to death. This is why you get the response that was there. And so we can see, again, Jesus never said that I am able to destroy the temple. According to John 2:19, Jesus actually says, destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days. He did not say that he would destroy the temple. He said, destroy this temple, as if somebody destroys it, I will rebuild it in 3 days. So again, they've taken Jesus' words out of context. They've taken the law out of context. They've brought false witnesses against him. But how do they respond? It's out of anger. How does Jesus respond? It's out of still love, and it's still out of peace, and it's still out of his knowledge of the word that he brings the case and ruins the case against them. Here's one thing that I want to mention, and it's just a fun fact, if you will. Once these witnesses contradicted each other, they could have been declared false witnesses, and the case against Jesus should have been dropped. In fact, under Jewish law, in a capital case, false witnesses were supposed to be put to death, and that's right from Deuteronomy chapter 19. So by these people bringing false testimony against Jesus, they could have stopped right there, and they could have tested them according to Deuteronomy 19, and they could have put him to death. There was a deadline. The deadline was nightfall. And we see that according to the requirements of the law and according to Jewish law, if the accused was declared innocent after one vote, then it was the end of the matter. But in a capital case, if 37 or more members voted for death, they were required to go home and sleep for a night before voting the next day because death was involved. Because of the popularity of Jesus, if they didn't move fast, they felt that the crowd would rise against them. And we have to stop and we have to ask ourselves in this picture of everything. Is the rise of Jesus and the popularity of Jesus combined with the bias and the anger of the religious leaders was setting that collision course for Jesus to be put to death. And again, we see Jesus go between 6 different trials and back and forth between Pilate twice, and we see between different religious leaders and civil judges, all to find ways to put him to death. And you may be asking yourselves this morning, what does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with who I am right now in 2020 as I sit in my home and watch this? I think there's a reality that when someone hears about who you are, and more importantly, what you believe, more and more we're living in a world where there will be a negative response. I mean, I get that all the time. Because inevitably, I have to answer that question when someone says, "Oh, what do you do?" And I say, "I'm a pastor." Often that's filled with anger. Right after that, they say, "Oh, well, here are the things that I don't like about church," or "Here's why I don't go to church anymore." And all of a sudden, there's this anger that builds up inside them from past experiences or what they know about Christians or whatever it may be. And I have no doubt that when people hear that you are a Christ follower and you share about who Jesus is to you, that you will also get a similar response that often is one that comes from anger. And the question is how are we going to respond to it? The courtyard was a place where of persecution. The courtyard was a place of false witness. The courtyard was a place of anger. And yet, Jesus was there. Even in the angry moments, Jesus was there. So are you willing to stand up and say, "I am a Christ follower"? Are you willing to tell your story and how Jesus is involved in it? Are you willing to shy away from it? We see this later on, right? Because Peter now all of a sudden goes to the other side where it's about denial. Peter is all of a sudden pretending, and we see that he denies Jesus 3 different times. And out of this, we see kind of some things about both Peter and Caiaphas. Both of the main people in this story with Peter and Caiaphas, we see that Caiaphas pretended to be more spiritual than he really was. He pretended to be a spiritual leader, yet at the end of the day, he had his own bias and he wanted things done a certain way. And he needed to get it done. Peter, on the other hand, pretended to be worse than he was. Caiaphas was an obvious hypocrite, while Peter practiced reverse hypocrisy. This is pretty common for us probably today, and probably something fairly common among Christians. Have you ever acted worse than you are just to be accepted? I mean, have you ever taken that moment where you've kind of had to let your values slip or let one of your morals slip in order to be accepted? That's kind of what happened with Peter, isn't it? He let things slip in order to be accepted. He didn't want the anger that was coming towards Jesus to be coming towards him. And so when he gets asked, "Do you know Jesus?" or "Don't you belong to the people who follow along Jesus?" his answer is that of no. Just so he can be accepted. As Peter hears the rooster crow, I've always pictured him freezing in mid-sentence as he realizes what he's done. And in the last part of verse 74 in Matthew chapter 26, it indicates that this happened immediately after the third denial. Like the moment the last word finished in Peter's mouth, the rooster crowed. Immediately, it says, "Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. He went outside and he wept bitterly." Right? don't you have those experiences? And those we all probably have them once or twice where someone says, "Oh wait, aren't you a Christian? Why would you do that?" And it's like that gut punch as you realize that you probably should have made a different choice than you actually did. I remember one time I was golfing, and this was in my younger years, and I was like 16 years old. No, I must have been 18 years old. We'll just say I was in a teen. And uh, as I was out there, I was instructing kids on the golf course, and I had about 6 or 7 little kids, probably around second or third grade, out on the golf course with me. And you have to understand that often when golfers, after they hit the ball, they start talking to the ball. Sit down, get going, get moving, get moving, get moving, sit down, to the left, left, left. And we hope that the ball is actually going to answer us at one point, but it never does. And sometimes we yell at the ball when the ball isn't doing what we tell it to do. And I would do that, and I remember it. I was trying to give this great instruction to these kids. I told them this is exactly what you need to do, and then I swung and I hit the ball, and I'm looking at it, and it's like opposite of what I said it was going to do. I hit it completely wrong. As if the ball's in the air, I'm saying, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, and then I say, sit down, you stupid. And then I said something else, and that probably shouldn't have been said. But as I turn around, I just saw 7 kids with their mouths wide open. And I was like, oh no. Because no matter what happens now, no matter what great things they experience at camp the whole rest of the week, in my mind, I know the first thing they're going to do when they get in the car, when they get home, is they're going to say, guess what our golf instructor said this week? And so, it turned into a very teachable lesson. As much as I didn't want to make it a teachable lesson, it was one of those ones I sit down and I had to say, listen, sometimes I make mistakes. And sometimes you'll make mistakes. To which they responded, yeah, but we probably wouldn't say that. And which is true. But I think, it turned into a teachable moment. But, the moment I knew it, they're like, well, you're a counselor. You work at this camp. You're a Christian. You should know better. And it's very easy for us to get discouraged by that. But it's also very easy for us to realize that a change needs to happen when those moments happen. And that's where I see Jesus and Peter's relationship. One that here Peter is denying Jesus, yet later on Jesus is asking Peter to be the rock on which his church is founded. There's something very important about Peter's journey from realizing what he's done wrong to making it right. And these two people that we see here, again, Caiaphas pretended to be more spiritual than he was. And I could probably talk more about that as well. Because I know there's times where we may think that we are being very religious on a Sunday morning, and the moment we walk out those doors, it may be, well, it was great being a Christian for today. I'll do it again next Sunday. But it also may be that difficulty in letting things be compromised in our lives. There's 2 lessons that we can learn here. The first one is understanding the motives of the religious leaders and the response that Jesus gave to them is one still being out of love and one being out of knowledge. And the second thing is that we can learn from both Caiaphas and Peter, understanding that their responses to pressure and who they were, and watching what happened when they were compromised. Caiaphas didn't care. Peter recognized and wanted reconciliation. I want us to think about that this week as we go from here. I want us to be able to move forward and see that in our own story, as we share our own story, that there are going to be times where it's going to feel like people are coming against us. They're going to be saying bad things about us, bad things about church, bad things about Jesus, bad things about what we care about the most. And we have to ask ourselves, how will we respond? Will we respond out of anger, or will we respond out of love? Are we going to just simply allow when someone says something about Christ followers, about my own faith? Are we just going to be like Peter and allow maybe a bit of the moral or ethical answer to be compromised? Are we going to respond out of truth about what we believe and where we go from there? Next week, we're going to take a look at the civil trials of Jesus. These are the religious ones, but I want to talk about the civil trials because we can really see about not only how do we deal with people outside the walls of the church, but really just in day-to-day life. Although day-to-day life is a little different than what it was last week or the week before. But as we go through this, I want you to be encouraged that as we look at these different places that Jesus found himself during the Easter story, he never compromised. As we go into a new season of whatever may be lying ahead, our prayer is that we won't be compromised, that we will respond out of truth. If that's what we do, I firmly believe the kingdom of God will grow. And I firmly believe that as we go from here, no matter what the situation is, I know that the gospel message won't be hindered. That God is still using us, God is still using the church, and he is using his people to spread the message of who he is so that people will know who Jesus is and why he died. During this time, we want to thank you for giving to Calvary. Even though we're online, there's still expenses as we get used to this world where we're not gathering every Sunday. Below, you'll find the links to where you can give online as we move to online giving. But you're able to do that through PushPay. You're able to do it through texting CBC Regina to 77977, as well as mailing whatever you would like to give to the church. We want to thank you for your giving in advance. We believe that God is bigger than the virus that is going around, and we believe that God's kingdom will still grow during this time, and we thank you for your support and your contributions.